Alex, thanks so much for giving us a few minutes. Now, we're here to talk about the new album Stygian Waves by your band Envy of None. And I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised by the atmospheric sounds of the songs. The songs don't rely on the straightforward rock sound, but they're really cinematic. They have a cinematic aspect that goes well with Maya's voice.
I would agree. You can envision the music. The first album was like that too. I come from that background. Rush, in a lot of ways, was a cinematic kind of band. That's the way we told our stories, in a very cinematic way. But this project, Envy of None, is much more of that. Just the way we create the music and the tones that we use, and
Mhm.
a lot of it has to do with Maya and the contrast of her voice against the sort of the maybe I don't think darkness is the right
Mm-mm.
word for the tonality of the record, but there is a quality about it that her vocal just weaves in and out and sits on top, and it's a really good combination, I think.
Let's talk about Maya's voice. I mean, it's nothing short of extraordinary. I mean, her range and versatility are just absolutely captivating. I love it. The way her vocals seamlessly complement the song's musical landscape. I mean, it's just brilliant. But what I want to know is, was it a challenge to write for her unique vocal style?
No, it wasn't. When we started working, I think it was an open slate when we began with her. But once we got into a groove and started writing some of the songs, um, and getting to know her voice and her presentation, how she presents her voice, um, we didn't really think about it. We were writing the music that we wanted to write, and it just worked. I think with Stygian Waves, there's greater variety on Stygian Waves.
Mhm.
We have a lot of funky stuff. We have the typical, darker moments. The power pop kind of music, the story, for example.
Sure.
So we've gotten used to each other, and when I got the mixes back, mastered mixes in sequence, and I hadn't listened to the record for in a few days, I thought, wow, you know what? This is not just a recording project. This is a band now.
Yeah.
We've created a band, and we work as a unit, and that's all part of it. It's we don't think, we just do, and I'm thrilled with the results that we got.
Now, Alex, as I heard it, Andy Current, the bass player for Envy of None, and of course, a friend of yours from your days with Rush, he called you up to get your thoughts on some guitar parts. And of course, a few years later, Envy of None is born.
That's right. We just finished the last Rush tour, and
Hmm.
I played a little bit, but I didn't do too much for, I would say, close to a year.
Hmm.
And Andy was working on his own stuff, and he reached out and asked me if I would put some guitars on some of the things he was doing. And he said, doesn't have to be fancy, just so I have an idea if it's going to work. So that's exactly what I did. I just threw some guitars on. They weren't particularly tight. I just used plugins, so it didn't use amps, and just so that he had a scratch idea of what the vocals or what the guitar would be.
Hmm.
He got an offer to be a judge in a talent contest, and Maya was one of the contestants. So he said to Maya, what you need to do is you get out with other people and learn your craft and trade, and the more people you work with, the better it'll be for you. She said, well, I Googled you and I know what your past is like, so why don't we work together? And he kind of laughed and thought, that's kind of ballsy. And he decided to, okay, you know what, we'll send you a song, and we'll take it from there. So he sent a track that we'd already been working on with another female vocalist called Liar. It's on the first record.
Yeah.
Sent it to her. She did her vocal, came back. I As soon as I heard it, I called Andy and said, Andy, erase everything I gave you. I'm going to redo all the guitars properly. We have to work with this girl. She's amazing. And she was 19 at the time. So it just went from there. I used her on another project that I was doing with Marco Miniman,
Hmm.
um, and she excelled in that. And she was, learning her way. So here we are, so many years later, and it's really gelled in a beautiful way.
Now, Alex, let's dive into one of my favorite songs from the debut album. That's a song called Enemy. Now, Maya's vocals on that track are just hauntingly powerful. I mean, there's a raw intensity to them. What was it like seeing her bring that song to life in the studio?
Enemies, her delivery of that vocal, oh, I'm getting goosebumps as I'm talking about it, was amazing. Yeah, that's a really, really dark song. And her vocal on that was, oh, like slapping you in the face gently. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And Under the Stars, there's a similar quality in her delivery, but uh, it's just deeper in the way she's put it together. Her arrangements are amazing.
Alex, let's talk about your guitar work with Envy of None. I mean, it's completely different than your work with Rush. I mean, the way you blended guitars across both albums. I mean, it was nothing short of genius. I mean, you completely steered away from a lot of your traditional song structures and solos. Instead, you're playing to the service of the song. What was your approach to crafting that sound?
Yeah, absolutely, it is. It's so welcome. I mean, the first record, I think, uh, I was really into this sort of mode where I wanted to create guitar sounds that didn't sound like guitar, and
Right.
that was a lot of fun for me because it's it's challenging. Yes, you have to be resourceful to create those kind of sounds that are not normally that part of that instrument. With this record, I felt a little looser. I felt more traditional in my approach to guitar. So
Right.
there are more kind of heavy guitars. There are lots of funky guitars, Not Dead Yet, Thrill of Chase.
Hmm.
That was so much fun to play like that. I mean, that's part of those are part of my roots, my 60s roots as a young teenager, learning to play guitar. Toronto had a great R&B scene, R&B scene at that time in the late
Hmm.
60s, bands like Mandela and the Yeomen. And so it was great for me to go back and play those kind of chords with that kind of emphasis. So it was liberating in a lot of ways. I felt more comfortable soloing. There are quite a few solos on the record. It was really a nice progression for all of us, but particularly for me as a guitarist.
Now, Alex, I'd love to get inside your head for a moment. When you're writing a song, what's your process for choosing the right guitar? I mean, every guitar player has got their own little process, but are you seeking a specific tone that you feel will bring the song to life, or do you just let the music dictate the instrument?
Okay, that's a great question because I this is what I do. This is where I work, right?
Hmm.
And I have all my gear here. You can see I have all my analog gear and amps and all of that stuff. So the, when I'm working on a song, I do this. Uh, I think this. I pick a guitar that I think is going to work best for that song, and then I go and I get it, and I'm usually right.
I mean, it's always been fascinating to me. I mean, the creative process, especially for a guitar player.
That's right. For me, guitars are tools, and I have a pretty big toolbox. I auctioned off 60 guitars a couple of years ago for charity.
Right.
And then I realized that I still had 30 or 40 guitars stashed around, some under the bed, some in a closet, some in storage. And I, I, my collection is all about that. They all have different specialties, you
Hmm.
know, and the way they feel, the way they sound. So it's nice to have a lot of different tools because you have to be very specific about the right tool for the right job.
Sure.
And it's nice to be able to have that at your, at your beck
So,
and
yeah.
call.
Now, I've got a question from a fan about the song Xanadu. I mean, they're curious about the story behind the creation of that iconic Rush track. What can you tell us about the writing process and the making of that classic?
You know, I'll tell you, the interesting thing about it, we went into Rockfield Studios in Wales when we recorded that record,
Right.
and Xanadu was the first song we recorded. We we were in the studio. We we ran it down for the engineer one time so he could get his levels on the drums and all of that stuff. And then we were going to do a take. And we played the song from beginning to end. And that's the take that you hear on the record.
Right.
That was the first full take that we did of Xanadu. And Pat Moran, who was the engineer at the time, freaked out. He said, "What? You come in here and you play a 9-minute song in one take, and that's it? Who are you guys?" He was blown away. But in fairness, we'd been playing it for a couple of months before we recorded it. We'd written it. We played it a little bit at a couple of shows. So we were, it was a song that we were playing. So it was kind of easy to go in and just throw it down. But to play an 8-minute song with double necks was really quite an accomplishment.
Now, Alex, Rush has always been at the forefront of the Canadian music scene. I mean, they paved the way for a new generation of musicians and songwriters. Take us back to your roots. What was the music scene like in Toronto as you were growing up, and how did it really explode in the 80s and 90s?
Well, back then, I guess, in the 60s, early 70s, Canada didn't have a great record company industry here. There were more outposts for American companies and European companies. Sure. So it was very hard to get a deal, for example, or get any interest. And everything was based on pop, easy radio kind of friendly music. And we weren't that. So that's why it was very difficult for us to get a deal. But in those formative years for me, Toronto had an amazing music scene. There were so many great bands, and it was divided between kind of the hippies and the R&B guys. Mm-hmm. And the hippies were up in Yorkville, which was kind of the Haight-Ashbury of Toronto, and the R&B guys were playing downtown. Okay. And there was kind of a division between the two. But we used to go to so many shows and see so many great bands: the Poppers, the Stitch in Time, the Yeomen. The Ugly Ducklings were one of my favorite bands, and if you listen to their first record, you would hear a lot of influences in the way I write music and play, because they really had a big, profound, and they were just a local band. They were just, I don't even know if they were out of their teens. Sure. So there was a great music scene here in Toronto. I'm sure Vancouver had their own. Bryan Adams came up out of there. Heart was out of there. So we did have a really good music scene that was quite different from American or the British scene. We were somewhere in the middle. We were influenced by the stuff that came from the States. We were also influenced by the stuff that came from the UK. And it was a cool place to be, because the influences were on both sides. They weren't just one or the other. Sure. So it kind of tempered the way we listen to music in this country.
Well, I can't talk to you about the Canadian music scene without talking about one of my favorite bands, along with Rush, and that's the Tragically Hip. I mean, they were one of those bands that truly defined the Canadian music scene in the late 80s and, of course, 90s and beyond. Yet they never got the chart success they deserved in the United States. I mean, to me, that feels like one of the greatest injustices in recent music history. What was your take on that?
We played with them. They opened for us on some shows, and we became, good friends with them. And Gord and Neil were good buddies as well. Mm-hmm. How strange that they both succumbed to the same disease, but they were both very strong lyricists. We thought that they would be huge in America. Right. To go down and start in that college circuit, they were the perfect band for that. And because they're kind of rootsy band, like Canadian rootsy band. So they could have been enormous, but I don't know, maybe something in the timing or, it was the management. There's lots of reasons that it could have been, but they made a decision that, it's too much work to build something in the States. Let's just concentrate in Canada. So, and they became, possibly the biggest, most popular band in Canada. Mm-hmm. We've always been a little more international. I mean, our roots are here, and obviously we spent time here, but we've been sort of all over the place. Yeah. But they were a really, really great band.
Now we're nearing the 45th anniversary of Rush's iconic Moving Pictures album. I mean, for every Rush fan, that's one of those seminal moments in our history. So I'd love to take you back to the making of it, but more specifically, let's talk about Le Studio. I mean, that was your band's creative haven for so many years before it closed down in 2003. And I believe it eventually burned down. But what was it like working there? And how did that space shape the sound of moving pictures?
We did a lot of records at La Studio. Moving Pictures was the most fun record we ever made. It was such a great energy and a great vibe. It was winter. It was a very cold winter as well. When I say very cold, I mean -30, -40. You'd have a week of that kind of weather. But it was still a lot of fun to work there. We would snowshoe or a ski, like cross country ski to the studio. I generally drove over, but it was part of that whole Canadian experience, the Great North. And when we started working on moving pictures, everything came along just so effortlessly. We were well prepared. We'd written all the material. We knew what we were doing. We went in, we got sounds. We did things a little differently. We actually mixed it down on digital, which was like one of the first Sony digital machines. Compared to modern digital, that thing was a Model T, right? But the record sounds great. So, so long as you get the results. Yeah, that was really, really a lot of fun to do. We made a couple of videos there that were fun. I remember when we did Witch Hunt, we were down in the parking area. They set up mics, and we were the mob crowd in the background in Witch Hunt in the opening.
Sure.
And if you listen carefully, you can hear us laughing because we'd had a few drinks and we were screaming and yelling about the most ridiculous things as a mob.
Sure.
But some of the things that we're saying are totally like unrelated to anything. But it was such a feel-good record, making moving pictures.
Now, personally, I've been a Rush fan since my uncle picked up Fly By Night, back in the 70s. I mean, he was drawn to the album cover because of his love of owls. So that's how I was introduced to the band. But, I've been hooked since that second album. But to be honest, I kind of resented moving pictures, the album success, and not because I didn't appreciate it. I still do to this day. It's a master class in musicianship, but I think I'm not alone out here. But a lot of us fans is because all of these new fans jumped on the bandwagon. They didn't know albums like Caress of Steel or tracks like Passage to Bangkok. I mean, they just I felt like they were stealing my band from me. Can you relate to that sense of ownership over the early years?
It's funny how that happens. And I know what you mean. You get possessive. It feels like you discovered something. This is my band.
Yeah.
I found them. And I think we had a lot of fans like that in the early days, that because we weren't particularly popular, we weren't really well known. A lot of comments about Geddy's high voice and too loud and too heavy and all of that kind of crap. So if you were into the band, you were like solid. You were a Rushian.
Yes.
And when Movie Pictures came out, it was such a popular record when it came out, and eventually, that somehow that diluted your special status.
Yep.
As an original. I know what you mean.
Now, as the 80s rolled in, I mean, Rush seemed like the perfect band for the changing times. I mean, you were always ahead of the curve, embracing new technology, yet your songwriting never lost its integrity. How did you navigate that transition, staying true to your roots, but you're also adapting to that ever evolving musical landscape of the times?
We were always on the cutting edge of technology. We were always embraced what was coming next. And but in the 80s, we made a conscious effort to break ties with Terry Brown, who'd done all those records up until Grace Under Pressure. Well, up until Signals, he did Signals. But at Grace Under Pressure, we wanted to change. We felt like we needed to learn more. We didn't want to be just locked into the same relationship with the same person. As much as we loved working with Terry, and as much as we loved him as a friend, we started working with other people, and they would influence what we were doing. We wanted to develop the keyboards, maybe some members more than others. And that's, when we went into that direction. And, if I was not that keen on really developing the keyboards, like I didn't have a problem with keyboards. They were essential to our sound and really important. But with those two records, Power Windows and Hold Your Fire, we really opened up the keyboard thing, and it really was a different sound. And I changed my guitar sound to accommodate the keyboards and all of that stuff. And I love those records. They sound amazing to me, and I love the fact that we followed that course to write that kind of music, because it is very different in when you look at the whole Rush catalog.
Mm-hmm.
But it was much more challenging to me, and I have to say that once we got to counterparts, I felt like we're combining keyboards, but the guitar has its presence, and the power of the band is more focused. And I was happy for that rebirth.
Alex, I've got to ask you about one of my personal favorite Rush tracks. Now, that's The Pass from the 1989 album Presto. It really stands out as such a different sound for the band at the time, but it's also incredibly emotional. I mean, I feel like that song doesn't get the recognition it deserves in the Rush catalog. What's your perspective on it?
The Past was one of our favorite songs, like really top three. Mm-hmm. We loved playing it, but there's a quality about that song that's very solemn. And it deals with death and grief. And who knew then that we would have our large share of grief through our career? But there's something about the way that song is constructed, and the performances. The performances are restrained and a little subdued, and that's a conscious effort when you're making it. And when we finished the song, I remember thinking, this is a song that came out exactly the way we intended it to. Things change in the studio depending on what the day, the sound, the equipment, whatever. But that one really turned out the way we do. It's one of my favorite solos. It's a heartbreaking solo that I played in that song. It's definitely a really, really special one for us. I'm glad you brought that up.
Alex, thanks so much for taking some time to chat today. I mean, it's been a pleasure diving into the new Envy of None album and, of course, reflecting on the legacy of Rush, especially those classic tracks and albums. I mean, and everybody out there, Envy of None, Stygian Waves, out now. Go ahead and grab that anywhere you get your new music today. You will not be disappointed. And Alex, I can't wait to catch up with you again soon. Best of luck to you.
For sure we will. Thanks a lot, Chris.
No problem. Thank you
All
so
the best.
much.
Take care.